Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
The Haunting of St. Agnes. The winter of 1943 was one of the harshest on record. The biting cold, the relentless snow, and the unyielding darkness made the war seem even more brutal. The Allies had received intelligence about a hidden German outpost in the remote village of St. Agnes, located deep within the Black Forest of Germany. The mission was simple: infiltrate, gather intelligence, and eliminate the threat. However, the reality of the mission would prove far more terrifying than any of the soldiers could have imagined. Lieutenant James Caldwell was chosen to lead the mission, a seasoned officer with countless successful missions under his belt. Caldwell was known for his tactical brilliance and unwavering resolve. His team consisted of 6 men: Sergeant William Bill Turner, Corporal Samuel Sam Hayes, Privates Thomas Don Dawson, Robert Bob Thompson, and the brothers John and Michael Mick O'Reilly. They set off on a cold December morning, their breath visible in the icy air. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound being the crunch of snow under their boots. The deeper they ventured, the darker it became, the towering trees blocking out the scant sunlight. After hours of trekking, they finally arrived at St. Agnes, a village seemingly abandoned and frozen in time. The village had a sinister aura. The houses, though intact, were dark and empty. The church, which stood in the center, had its doors wide open, as if inviting them in. Caldwell decided to make the church their base of operations. As they entered, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread washed over them. The first night was uneventful, but the silence was unnerving. The men took turns keeping watch, the howling wind their only company. As dawn broke, Caldwell ordered a search of the village. They found nothing: no signs of life, no footprints in the snow, and no evidence of an enemy presence. It was as if the village had been abandoned overnight. That night, things took a darker turn. Turner, who was on the first watch, reported hearing whispers coming from the forest. Dismissing it as the wind, Caldwell reassured his men. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke in German, words of warning and despair. The next morning, they found Turner missing. His gear was still there, his rifle leaning against the wall, but he was nowhere to be found. A search of the village and the surrounding forest yielded nothing. The men were on edge, fear creeping into their minds. On the third night, the whispers returned, this time accompanied by shadows that moved just beyond the firelight. Caldwell ordered the men to stay close, their rifles at the ready. As the night deepened, the whispers turned into wails, the shadows growing bolder. Suddenly, Mick let out a scream. The men turned to see him being dragged into the darkness by unseen hands. They fired into the void, but it was too late. Mick was gone. Panic set in. The men, trained for combat and hardened by war, were now facing an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Caldwell tried to keep morale up, but the fear was palpable. They decided to fortify the church, barricading the doors and windows. That night, the church was besieged. The wails and whispers were deafening, the shadows pressing against the barricades. Caldwell, clutching his rifle, saw a figure standing at the altar. It was a woman, her eyes hollow, her skin pale and translucent. She began to speak, her voice a chilling whisper. She told them of the village's dark past, During the early days of the war, the villagers had been accused of harboring Allied spies. In retaliation, German soldiers had slaughtered everyone, leaving the bodies to rot. The church had become a place of unspeakable horror, the villagers' spirits trapped in an eternal cycle of torment. As she spoke, the shadows grew closer, the temperature dropping further. The men fired at the shadows, but their bullets had no effect. The woman continued, telling them that the only way to break the curse was to find and bury the bodies, giving the spirits peace. With no other options, Caldwell and his remaining men ventured into the forest the next morning. Guided by the woman's spirit, they found a mass grave, the bodies frozen in time. They spent the day digging, their fingers numb from the cold. As they buried the last body, the forest grew silent, the oppressive darkness lifting. That night the church was quiet, the whispers were gone, the shadows no longer looming. The men, exhausted and haunted by what they had witnessed, finally slept. At dawn they left St. Agnes, the village now a ghost town, its dark past buried beneath the snow. Caldwell reported the mission as a success, but he never spoke of the horrors they had faced. The men who survived were forever changed, the shadows of St. Agnes following them long after the war had ended. Part 2. The return to St. Agnes. In the years following the war, Caldwell tried to put the memories of St. Agnes behind him, but the nightmares persisted, vivid and unrelenting. In 1950, 5 years after the war had ended, he received a letter from a German historian named Dr. Friedrich Weber. Dr. Weber had been researching the events in St. Agnes and had uncovered new information. He invited Caldwell to return to the village to help uncover the truth. Haunted by the past and desperate for closure, Caldwell agreed. He reached out to the remaining members of his team. Sam Hayes and Tom Dawson agreed to join him, despite their own lingering fears. Together, they made their way back to the Black Forest. The journey to St. Agnes was eerily familiar. The forest seemed unchanged, the shadows as oppressive as ever. When they arrived, they found the village still abandoned, the church standing in silent vigil over the frozen landscape. Dr. Weber greeted them, his eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Dr. Weber led them to the church, where he had set up a makeshift research station. He explained that he had uncovered documents indicating that the massacre in St. Agnes had been part of a larger, darker ritual. The German soldiers, under the command of an SS officer named Heinrich Metzger, had been conducting occult experiments, attempting to summon and control dark forces. As night fell, the familiar whispers began. Dr. Weber, though intrigued, seemed unprepared for the chilling reality of the village's curse. The group decided to investigate the crypt beneath the church, hoping to find more clues. The air grew colder as they descended the stone steps, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. In the crypt, they found ancient texts and artifacts, evidence of Metzger's ritualistic practices. The most disturbing discovery was a large, ornate mirror covered in runes. As Caldwell approached, the mirror began to shimmer, showing glimpses of the past. They saw the villagers' final moments, the terror and despair etched on their faces. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, releasing a chilling wind that extinguished their candles. The whispers turned to screams, and shadows began to move around them. In the chaos, Caldwell felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Turning, he saw the spectral figure of Heinrich Metzger, his eyes burning with malevolence. Metzger spoke in a guttural voice, condemning them for disturbing his work. He revealed that his spirit was bound to the village, and he sought to complete his dark ritual. Caldwell, Hayes, and Dawson fought to maintain their composure, but the terror was overwhelming. Realizing they needed to break the ritual, Dr. Weber suggested they destroy the artifacts and texts. As they smashed the items, the shadows grew more agitated, the air filled with an unearthly wail. Metzger's spirit lashed out, but the group persevered, determined to end the curse once and for all. In a final, desperate act, Caldwell grabbed a nearby torch and set the remaining artifacts ablaze. The flames roared to life, consuming the dark relics. Metzger's spirit let out a blood-curdling scream before dissipating into the ether. The crypt fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Emerging from the church, they found the village bathed in an eerie, tranquil light. The whispers were gone, the shadows no longer menacing. St. Agnes, it seemed, had finally found peace. Caldwell and his team left the village, their hearts heavy, but their spirits lighter. The horrors of St. Agnes would stay with them, but they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. As they returned to their lives, they carried with them the memory of a place where the past and present had collided, where the shadows of war had given way to a haunting far more terrifying. Years later, Caldwell wrote a memoir detailing the events in St. Agnes. His account, though met with skepticism by many, became a source of fascination for those interested in the supernatural and the occult. Dr. Weber continued his research, publishing several papers on the intersection of war and the paranormal. The village of St. Agnes, though still abandoned, became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the mysteries of the past. The church, once a place of horror, stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of courage in the face of darkness. And so the story of St. Agnes lived on, a chilling reminder of the shadows that linger at the edges of our. The Phantom Battalion. In the winter of 1944, the European theater of World War II was embroiled in chaos. The Allies were pushing back against the Axis powers, but the war was far from over. In a remote part of the Ardennes forest, intelligence reports had surfaced about a secret German research facility rumored to be experimenting with unconventional warfare. The mission was clear: infiltrate, gather intelligence, and neutralize the threat. But as the soldiers would soon discover, the true nature of the enemy was far beyond anything they had imagined. Captain David Reynolds was assigned to lead the operation, a decorated officer with a reputation for strategic brilliance. Reynolds had handpicked a team of seasoned soldiers for the mission. His team included Lieutenant Jack Turner, Sergeant Bill Harris, Corporal Sam Miller, Privates Tom Collins, John Brooks, and the sharpshooter, Private Annie Lawson. They set off under the cover of darkness, navigating through the dense, snow-covered forest. The air was biting cold, and the silence was oppressive. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees casting long, eerie shadows. After hours of marching, they reached the edge of a small village called Waldheim, nestled in a secluded valley. Waldheim had an air of desolation. The houses were dark, the streets empty. The only sign of life was the church standing in the center, its doors slightly ajar. Reynolds decided to use the church as their base. Inside, the air was even colder, and a sense of foreboding hung over them. They set up a perimeter and took turns keeping watch. The first night passed uneventfully, though the men couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At dawn, Reynolds ordered a reconnaissance of the village. They found no signs of the enemy, but strange symbols were etched into the doors of the houses, and the villagers seemed to have vanished without a trace. Part 2. Unseen Threats. As night fell, the situation took a turn for the worse. Turner, who was on first watch, reported seeing flickering lights in the forest. The men dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, but the unease grew. Just past midnight, the whispers began. At first, they were barely audible, but soon they became insistent, speaking in a mix of German and an unknown language. The following morning, Miller found strange footprints around their camp, leading in and out of the forest. They seemed to appear and disappear without reason, as if the creature that made them had no physical form. The team was on edge, their nerves fraying under the weight of the unknown. On the third night, the situation escalated. The whispers grew louder. The lights in the forest closer suddenly Brooks screamed. The team rushed to his position to find him staring into the trees, his eyes wide with terror. He claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving among the trees, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Reynolds tried to calm him, but the fear was contagious. Realizing they needed answers, Reynolds decided to search the forest during daylight. They found more strange symbols carved into the trees and remnants of what looked like old, hastily abandoned campsites. As they ventured deeper, they discovered an old, hidden path leading to a forgotten bunker. Part 3. The Bunker. The entrance to the bunker was partially collapsed, but they managed to clear a way in. Inside, the air was stale, and the walls were lined with strange, arcane symbols. It was clear that this was no ordinary military installation. They found documents detailing experiments on soldiers, attempting to harness supernatural forces to create invincible warriors. Deeper in the bunker, they encountered rooms filled with archaic equipment, jars containing preserved body parts, and tattered books on occult rituals. In the last room, they found a large, ominous stone altar covered in dried blood. It was clear that the facility's purpose had been far more sinister than they had imagined. As they prepared to leave, they heard footsteps echoing through the corridors. The temperature dropped sharply, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. Reynolds ordered his men to ready their weapons. Emerging from the shadows were the spectral figures of soldiers, their faces twisted in agony. The bullets passed through them harmlessly, and the ghosts advanced, their hollow eyes filled with malice. In a desperate bid for survival, Reynolds ordered a retreat. They fought their way out of the bunker, the spectral soldiers following them into the forest. As they emerged into the fading daylight, the apparitions vanished, but the sense of terror remained. Part 4. The Siege of Waldheim. Back at the church, Reynolds and his men regrouped. They knew they had to find a way to neutralize the supernatural threat. Miller, who had some knowledge of folklore, suggested they find and destroy the source of the haunting, likely the altar in the bunker. As night fell, the church came under siege. The spectral soldiers surrounded the building, their whispers now a deafening cacophony. Shadows moved with a life of their own, and the temperature drop to freezing levels. The men took turns firing at the apparitions, but it was futile. Lawson, the sharpshooter, kept a lookout from the church tower. She reported seeing more lights in the forest and verging on their position. Reynolds knew they were running out of time. They had to act fast. Part 5. The Final Stand. At dawn, Reynolds decided on a two-pronged plan. He would lead a small team back to the bunker to destroy the altar, while Turner and the rest would hold the church. Miller, Harris, and Collins volunteered to go with Reynolds. The journey to the bunker was harrowing. The forest seemed alive with malevolent forces, the trees whispering secrets of the past. They reached the bunker and set charges around the altar. As they prepared to detonate, the spectral soldiers reappeared, more aggressive than before. A fierce battle ensued. The men fought with everything they had, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire and unearthly wails. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Reynolds gave the order to detonate the charges. The explosion rocked the bunker, the altar shattering into pieces. Back at the church, Turner and his men faced their own battle. The spectral soldiers grew more aggressive as the night wore on, their attacks relentless. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, the explosion in the bunker sent a shockwave through the forest. The apparitions screamed in agony and began to dissipate, the curse broken. Part 6. Aftermath. The dawn brought an eerie silence to Waldheim. The spectral soldiers were gone, and the oppressive darkness had lifted. Reynolds and his team returned to the church, battered but victorious. They had faced an enemy beyond comprehension and survived. Reynolds reported the mission as a success, though he left out the details of the supernatural. The official record would show that the team had neutralized a secret German research facility, but the truth of what they had faced remained with them. The men returned to their units, forever changed by the experience. The memories of Waldheim haunted them, a chilly reminder of the unseen horrors that lurk in the shadows of war. Reynolds, in his later years, would write a memoir detailing the events in full. It became a source of fascination and skepticism, a story passed down through generations as a testament to the darkness that humanity can unleash. Part 7. The shadows return. Several years passed since the mission in Waldheim. The remaining members of Reynolds' team had tried to move on with their lives, but the memories lingered. In 1950, Reynolds received a letter from a man named Dr. Friedrich Weber, a historian who had uncovered more information about the mysterious happenings in Waldheim. Dr. Weber requested Reynolds' assistance to further investigate the area. Haunted by the past and seeking closure, Reynolds agreed. He contacted his old team. Turner, Harris, and Miller, still haunted by their experiences, decided to join him. The group set out once more for the forest that had scarred their souls. The journey back to Waldheim was filled with an eerie sense of déjà vu. The village looked just as abandoned as before, the church still standing in its foreboding silence. Dr. Weber greeted them at the church, explaining his research. He had discovered that the ritual performed by the Germans had not been fully completed, leaving the spirits restless. Part 8. The investigation deepens. Dr. Weber led them to various points of interest around Waldheim, including old German military posts and forgotten bunkers. The air grew colder as they delved deeper into the forest, uncovering more evidence of occult practices. Strange artifacts and books detailing dark rituals were found, confirming their worst fears. One night, as they reviewed their findings in the church, the whispers began again. This time they were clearer, more menacing. The spectral soldiers reappeared, their faces filled with even more rage and torment. Dr. Weber, though terrified, insisted on documenting everything. Reynolds, recognizing the signs of an impending attack, ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Part 9. The Battle for Survival. The nights grew increasingly perilous. The spectral soldiers' attacks were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. The team fortified the church as best as they could, but the apparitions always found a way to break through. The air was thick with fear and desperation. Dr. Weber, despite his initial bravado, was visibly shaken by the encounters. Reynolds knew that merely defending themselves would not be enough. They had to find a way to end the haunting once and for all. He decided to focus on the origins of the ritual. According to Dr. Weber's research, the ritual was meant to bind the spirits to the physical world, using the blood of the sacrificed soldiers as a tether. Destroying this tether might be their only hope. Part 10. A desperate plan. Dr. Weber's research indicated that the ritual was conducted in several stages, each stage requiring a specific location. The primary altar had been destroyed in their previous mission, but there were secondary sites scattered throughout the forest. Reynolds devised a plan to locate and destroy these sites, hoping to sever the spirit's connection to the world. The team split into two groups. Reynolds, Turner, and Dr. Weber formed the first group, while Harris, Miller, and Collins formed the second. Each group was to locate and destroy the altars, relying on the maps and notes Dr. Weber had collected. The forest was vast and filled with dangers, both natural and supernatural. Part 11. The hunt begins. Reynolds' group set out towards the northern part of the forest, where the first altar was believed to be located. The journey was arduous, the forest dense and unyielding. The temperature dropped as they moved deeper into the woods, and the whispers began again, more insistent and malevolent. They reached the first site just as night fell. The altar was a crude stone structure, covered in the same arcane symbols they had seen before. As they prepared to destroy it, the spectral soldiers attacked. The battle was fierce, but with coordinated effort, they managed to hold off the apparitions long enough to set the charges. The explosion shattered the altar, and the spirits screamed in agony before vanishing. Meanwhile, Harris' group faced their own challenges. They encountered traps and remnants of the German defenses, making their progress slow and dangerous. The forest seemed to fight against them, the very ground shifting under their feet. They finally reached their target, a small cave hidden by overgrowth. Inside, the altar waited. The battle was intense, but they managed to destroy it, causing the spirits to wail and retreat. Part 12. The Final Push. Both groups reconvened at the church, exhausted but determined. They had destroyed several altars, but the main threat remained. Dr. Weber revealed that the final stage of the ritual involved a central nexus, a place where the spirits were bound together. This nexus was located deep within the forest in a place known as the Black Hollow. The journey to the Black Hollow was the most perilous yet. The forest grew darker and more oppressive, the air filled with an unnatural chill. The whispers were now a constant presence, gnawing at their sanity. The team moved cautiously, every step a battle against the unseen forces trying to stop them. Part 13. The Heart of Darkness. They reached the Black Hollow as night fell. The nexus was a clearing dominated by a massive stone monolith covered in blood and runes. The ground around it was scorched and barren, a stark contrast to the dense forest. The air was thick with malevolence, the spirits converging on the area in a swirling maelstrom of hate and despair. Reynolds ordered his men to set charges around the monolith, but as they worked, the spectral soldiers attacked with renewed ferocity. The battle was unlike any they had faced before. The spirits seemed to grow stronger, their forms more solid, and their attacks more vicious. The team fought desperately, knowing that failure here would mean doom for them all. Dr. Weber, despite his fear, managed to decipher part of the ritual. He realized that a final incantation was needed to break the spirit's hold. As Reynolds and his men fought off the spectral soldiers, Dr. Weber chanted the incantation, his voice growing stronger with each word. The spirits screamed in rage, their forms distorting as the power binding them began to weaken. Part 14. The final confrontation. The climax of the battle was a blur of chaos and terror. The spirits attacked with everything they had, their rage palpable. Reynolds and his men held the line, buying time for Dr. Weber to finish the incantation. As the last words left his lips, the monolith began to crack, a blinding light emanating from within. With a final, desperate push, Reynolds ordered the charges to be detonated. The explosion rocked the clearing, the monolith shattering into pieces. The light grew brighter, enveloping the area. The spirits wailed in agony, their forms disintegrating in the brilliant light. As the light faded, an eerie silence fell over the Black Hollow. The spirits were gone, their malevolent presence erased. The team, battered and exhausted, surveyed the aftermath. The monolith was nothing but rubble, and the oppressive darkness had lifted. Part 15. The Aftermath. The journey back to Waldheim was filled with a sense of relief and triumph. The curse that had haunted the forest was broken, the spirits finally at rest. Reynolds and his team returned to the church, where they rested and tended to their wounds. Dr. Weber documented everything, his notes and observations forming a comprehensive record of the events. Reynolds reported the mission as a success, though he once again omitted the supernatural elements. The official record would show that they had destroyed a series of enemy installations, but the true story remained with those who had lived it. Part 16. Years later. Years passed, and the men went their separate ways, each dealing with the memories in their own way. Reynolds retired from the military, but the events in Waldheim never left him. He published his memoirs, detailing the true story of the mission. It became a source of fascination and debate, with many dismissing it as fiction, but those who knew the truth understood the weight of his words. Dr. Weber continued his research, becoming a respected historian and occult expert. His work on the Waldheim incident became a cornerstone of his career, shedding light on the dark practices that had taken place during the war. The remaining members of the team stayed in touch, bound by their shared experience. They would occasionally reunite, reminiscing about the past and finding solace in each other's company. The forest of Waldheim, now peaceful, stood as a testament to their courage and the darkness they had faced. Part 17. The legacy, the story of Waldheim became a legend passed down through generations. It was a reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows and the strength of those who stand against them. The village itself remained abandoned, a ghostly reminder of the past. But the forest, now free of its malevolent spirits, began to heal. Reynolds, in his later years, found peace in knowing that they had done the right thing. The memories still haunted him, but he took comfort in the fact that they had freed the spirits trapped by the evil rituals. He spent his final years sharing his story, ensuring that the legacy of the Phantom Battalion would not be forgotten. The haunting in the jungle. The dense jungles of Vietnam were a place of constant danger and unseen threats. For the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division, every mission was a test of endurance and courage. Among them was Private James Harris, a young soldier who had quickly learned the harsh realities of war. Default text on humid evening, Harris and his platoon were deep in enemy territory on a reconnaissance mission. The jungle was alive with the sounds of insects and distant animal calls, but the soldiers moved with practiced silence, their senses on high alert. As night fell, the platoon set up a makeshift camp. Harris was on the first watch, his eyes scanning the darkened trees. The air was thick with humidity, and the only light came from the dim glow of the moon filtering through the canopy. It wasn't long before Harris began to feel an uneasy presence. The jungle, usually teeming with life, seemed to fall eerily silent. Then he heard a soft whispering, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. James, the voice seemed to call, sending a chill down his spine. Harris tightened his grip on his rifle, straining to see through the darkness. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. James ... help us. He turned to wake Sergeant O'Neill, the platoon leader. Sarge, there's something out there. I can hear it calling my name. O'Neill listened, his face growing grim. Stay sharp, Harris. We'll check it out together. The two men ventured a short distance from the camp, the whispering guiding them deeper into the jungle. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a small clearing, and what they saw made their blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood the ghostly figures of soldiers, their uniforms tattered and their faces pale. They seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Among them was a figure Harris recognized immediately as childhood friend, Private Tom Larson, who had gone missing in action months earlier. Tom, Harris whispered, disbelief and fear warring within him. Larson's ghostly figure stepped forward, his eyes filled with sorrow. James, we need your help. We can't move on. Our bodies are trapped in the caves nearby. You must find us and give us a proper burial. Harris felt a lump form in his throat. I promise, Tom, we'll find you. With that, the ghostly figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into the misty air. Harris and O'Neill returned to the camp, their minds racing with what they had witnessed. The next morning, they reported the encounter to their commanding officer, who, though skeptical, allowed them to search the area. With a small team, they retraced their steps to the clearing and began searching the nearby caves. After hours of searching, they found it a hidden cave filled with the remains of soldiers, their identities confirmed by the dog tags they still wore. Among them was Private Tom Larson. The remains were carefully recovered and later given a proper military burial. Harris felt a sense of closure and relief. knowing that he had honored his promise to his friend. The story of the haunted jungle spread among the troops, a reminder of the unseen toll of war. For Harris, it was a lesson that even in the darkest times, there are moments where the past reaches out, seeking peace and resolution. The Ghosts of Normandy. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were shrouded in mist, the salty air filled with the sounds of distant artillery and the quiet hum of approaching Allied forces. Among the first to land were the men of the 101st Airborne Division, tasked with securing key positions inland. Lieutenant Jack Turner led his platoon through the chaos of D-Day, pushing forward despite the heavy resistance. The horrors of war were all around them, but the men pressed on, driven by duty and the hope of ending the conflict. As night fell, the platoon found refuge in an old, abandoned chateau on the outskirts of a small village. The building had seen better days, its walls scarred by the ravages of time and conflict. Exhausted, the men set up camp, grateful for a moment's respite. Corporal Davis was on guard duty that night. The silence was unsettling, a stark contrast to the deafening noise of the battle they had just endured. As he walked to the perimeter, he heard faint whispers carried on the wind. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Help us," the voices seemed to say, barely audible over the rustling leaves. Davis felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the forest, shrouded in darkness. The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing the tattered uniform of a World War I soldier, his face pale and gaunt. "Who are you?" Davis called out, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, instead pointing towards the chateau. Davis's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the ghostly soldier's gaze. He knew he had to alert Lieutenant Turner. "Lieutenant, you need to see this," Davis whispered urgently, shaking Turner away. Turner gradually followed Davis outside, his eyes widening as he saw the spectral figure. The ghost began to move, leading them towards the cellar of the chateau. Hesitant but compelled, the men followed. The cellar door creaked open, revealing a dank, musty space. The ghost pointed to a corner where a hidden trapdoor lay partially covered by debris. Turner and Davis exchanged uneasy glances before clearing the debris and opening the trapdoor. A putrid smell wafted up from below, and with a deep breath, Turner descended into the darkness. His flashlight beam revealed a gruesome sight: dozens of skeletal remains, remnants of German uniforms, and personal effects. "These must be the prisoners," Turner muttered, his voice echoing in the confined space, executed and hidden away. The ghost of the World War I soldier appeared again, his expression one of sorrow and relief. "Thank you," he whispered before fading into the darkness. Turner and Davis climbed back up, their minds reeling from what they had discovered. They reported their findings to command, who arranged for a proper burial for the remains. The platoon moved on, but the memory of that night lingered. Years later, Turner would tell the story to his grandchildren, reminding them that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. The ghosts of Normandy had found peace, thanks to a chance encounter with the living, and the men who had followed their spectral guide never forgot the lesson that even in the darkest of times, there are moments of humanity and closure. Echoes of the Fallen. a haunted Vietnam War tale. Vietnam War, deep in the jungle near the Laotian border. Introduce the main characters: Lieutenant Thomas, a battle-hardened leader; Private Anderson, a young recruit; and Sergeant Miller, the skeptical veteran. Establish the premise. The squad is tasked with investigating the mysterious disappearance of another unit in a remote, heavily forested area. The squad arrives at the last known location of the missing unit, finding an abandoned camp with signs of a struggle but no bodies. They find the unit's radio equipment, still operational but emitting strange static and faint, ghostly voices. As they explore, they discover unsettling clues: bloody dog tags, scattered personal belongings, and eerie carvings on trees depicting scenes of violence. The first night. The squad sets up camp for the night, but unease grips the men as they feel they are being watched. Lieutenant Thomas hears distant gunfire and screams that seem to come from all directions. Private Anderson sees ghostly figures moving through the trees, resembling the missing soldiers. The temperature drops suddenly, and an otherworldly mist envelops the camp. The squad experiences collective hallucinations, seeing their comrades in horrifying states of death and mutilation. The squad ventures deeper into the jungle, following the ghostly apparitions. They stumble upon an ancient, abandoned village, covered in vines and moss, with eerie stone statues and shrines. The apparitions become more frequent and violent, with the ghostly soldiers appearing to warn and plead with the squad. The men start to turn on each other, driven mad by the constant whispers and visions. Lieutenant Thomas finds an old journal written by a French soldier from the Indochina War, detailing similar hauntings and the curse of the village. The journal reveals that the village was cursed after a massacre by French soldiers decades earlier. The spirits of the villagers and soldiers trapped in a cycle of vengeance. The squad realizes they must break the curse to survive. They must find and return a sacred relic stolen by the French soldiers, now hidden deep in the jungle. The squad faces numerous supernatural challenges, including ghostly ambushes, shifting landscapes, and terrifying visions of their own deaths. They finally locate the relic, an ancient, ornate dagger, and prepare to return it to the shrine in the village. The journey back is fraught with danger as the spirits become increasingly aggressive. They perform the ritual under the guidance of the ghostly apparitions, who reveal the truth of their own tragic deaths.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.